Hurting Michael Jackson. That's what the jury heard today in the case against his physician. Okay, we are able to report, unfortunately, that Apple is confirming that Steve Jobs has passed away after a battle with pancreatic cancer. This news just confirmed. You all may remember on August 24th of this year, Steve Jobs stepped aside due to his illness. Tim Cook was running Apple. Steve Jobs, 56 years old, again, dying of pancreatic cancer. This is a man who really stood for American exceptionalism, was the man who created the Mac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, all of that. You see him there. In the past few years, he had been battling pancreatic cancer. Obviously, you can see that on his frame. This is something investors had been talking about, and obviously with his final stepping aside, which he had done once before with Tim Cook taking the helm at Apple, is something that got a lot of attention on Wall Street. But he really was a man. You see him there. The reason Apple was so exceptional and those products were so exceptional and so loved was that he would show up in that black turtleneck and make the presentation, and it became an event with groupies and people around the world waiting for every event. Of course, just yesterday we had the 4S iPhone was announced by Tim Cook, with Steve Jobs obviously not there. I'm lucky enough to have Dr. Sanjay Gupta here. We were going to be talking about Michael Jackson, but weigh in if you could here. Obviously, this was a battle where he had succumbed and then come back to work, and now obviously...
Yeah, in 2003 was, I think, when we first heard for sure that he was sick, and at that point it was unclear. Was it pancreatic cancer? Was it something else? You remember for about a year or so, Aaron, he actually did not undergo any traditional therapy. He chose to treat this with herbal remedies and things like that, but then in 2004 started getting therapy in earnest at that point, subsequently getting a liver transplant a few years later. That was made a lot of news at that point because, you know, there was so much unknown about his health at that point. He got this liver transplant with really no fanfare, hardly any press coverage. People found out about it after the fact, and like you said, he appeared to be recovering. He got really thin, you remember, and he said he dismissed right, and he said this was a hormone imbalance. He never came right out and said this was pancreatic problem or pancreatic cancer specifically. You know, even at this announcement that you just mentioned, even then there was still a lot of speculation. Has the cancer returned? Is there something else going on? Does he just simply think he can't run the company anymore? But I think the suspicion was there for some time that the cancer had come back. Right. And pancreatic cancer, as you may know, is one of these really difficult cancers to treat.
People had thought, I mean, it was sort of an amazing story that he had been able to fight it off for so long.
That's right. And the liver transplant, for example, a somewhat unconventional, not common therapy for pancreatic cancer, doesn't work in everybody, but in his case, because he returned, they thought maybe he fell into the rare few category where he actually got a significant benefit from that, and maybe he did for a period of time. But I tell you, you know, in the medical community, we've been following this along for some time, and sort of since it was more confirmed that he had the pancreatic cancer, we just don't have great treatments for that at this point. And you know, 5-year survival is even limited, and we're talking about his case 8 years at least. 2003, I think, is when the diagnosis was confirmed.
And let me just give everyone a little bit more background here, just because he was such a magnificent person. I mean, really, that stood for so much of this country. For those of you who don't know, he was adopted, obviously very close to his family, but his original parents, as Sanjay and I were talking about, is Syrian, half Syrian.
Yeah, right.
So it's a very interesting background.
He went back and found his adoptive parents and got to know them. And his sister, I think, was also an artist, his biological sister. So
Mona Simpson,
talented family.
Yeah, pretty amazing. And he went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, but dropped out after one semester, which I'm sure will surprise no one watching, given what he was able to do. One of his first, at age 12, he asked William Hewlett, the founder of Hewlett-Packard, for some parts to complete a school project. And I guess it all started then. I mean, but a truly amazing story.
Well, who'd have known? We got from there to the iPad, you know, so many years later. It's pretty remarkable. But you're right, you know, some of these entrepreneurs just sort of eschewing standard education at that age and going off and doing these incredible things.
And Apple.com, we can say the website, and I'm going to that now, but is confirming that Mr. Jobs has passed away. I'm just pulling that up now here, Sanjay. But you can see it there, and that is now, you can see it here, Sanjay. That is the exact page that you get when it comes up. Obviously, a picture from several years ago of Mr. Jobs. But it is something that when he stepped aside on August 24th that we were all talking about, because he has created, I mean, Sanjay, you travel all the time. I travel all the time, and, you know, in China, You say to kids, what do you think of America? And they all just start yelling iPhone. I mean, it truly has become a real symbol for America in a positive way.
And there's so few novel products. I mean, even if you look at a lot of the products that come out, to have something truly novel that's truly something you haven't seen before is unusual, it seems, nowadays. But every time there was an announcement by Apple, I mean, I know that I kind of knew what I wanted for, you know, a potential gift. So it is really remarkable. And I saw that around the world as well. I mean, people really loved having these products.
And we, you know, yesterday we went to the Apple store for the 4S. We had a little bit of fun with it because they were going to come out with the 5, right? And then they came out with the 4S. And you ask all these people, so what's the 4S?
Right.
And they don't care what the 4S is. You know, they don't care if it's really much better than the 4. Right. They just want to have it. And there are so few products in the world people feel that way about.
No matter, without even fully knowing what it is. And they're not cheap. I mean, you're spending a lot of money on these products, but they will buy them in earnest for sure.
How unusual was his battle? Because again, I go back to the fact that, you know, in a sense, it sort of was a cry wolf that people started to think that he would be able to get through this, because he had stepped aside before and come back to run Apple again.
And there are people, you know, if you look at any sort of disease like this and you look at the numbers, there are people who are going to fall within the standard curve, but there's always going to be outliers, as you know, Aaron, on both sides. People who don't survive very long at all and people who survive a very long time. And I think people thought that maybe he was one of those outliers, or that he had a variant of some sort of pancreatic cancer. We still don't know exactly what type of pancreatic cancer this was, what exactly was causing it, but if it was one of these variants, perhaps it wouldn't abide by the typical laws or the typical data that we see with this, which is, again, pancreatic cancer and glioblastoma, which is a tumor of the brain. These are two of the worst tumors in terms of prognosis. If you get it, we don't have great therapies, let alone a cure, and the numbers just are abysmal at this point.
Sanjay, let's bring in Leander Caney into the conversation. He wrote Cult of Mac. And Leander, obviously, very sad news that he finally has succumbed to pancreatic cancer. What's your first reaction, though, to the legacy of the man that really stood for American exceptionalism?
Well, he has an incredible legacy. He's had an amazing career. I'd say he's right up there with some of the greatest innovators in American industry. You know, with Edison and with Ford. He completely set the agenda for the tech industry for 30 years. You know, from the first PCs for regular consumers to the Mac, you know, which set the agenda for the desktop era, and then he tore it all down with the iPhone and the iPad.
Leander, what about some of the challenges that he went through? Because there were times when, you know, the Mac was cool, but then all of a sudden, obviously, Apple went through a period where the company struggled, and then all of a sudden he came back and made it into the defining company that it is right now.
Yeah, what's strange about his career is that he was sort of dismissed as a failure for most of it.
Yeah.
It was only in the last few years that he really kind of got credit for, you know, for his successes. For most of his career, he was, especially while he was away from Apple, it was sort of for the first time the next years, you know, people said he was a slick marketer and he was just a salesman and he was a fast talker, but he didn't have any technology chops. And of course, you know, during that time, he was sort of laying the foundation for his later success. And people really didn't give him the credit for co-founding Apple. They you know, Wozniak got most of the credit for being the hardware genius. But, you know, looking back on it, hindsight is always 20/20. But you know, he's had an incredible career and an incredible vision. You know, which goes right back to the very beginning when he was a 19-year-old in the garage in Apple. I mean, he wanted to make easy-to-use technology for consumers, and he's been doing that for the last 30 years.
And Leander, I just want to let everyone know what you're looking at is actually the last video that we have of Steve Jobs when he was presenting the latest iPhone. There you have that video. Obviously, he was very ill. But Leander, you mentioned something that it seems worth bringing out more, which is that he did things his way. He was unafraid of people saying that he was a jerk, or unafraid of saying, "I'm going to design my software this way. It's not going to work with other software," and he ended up being right.
Yeah, this is what the big hallmark of his career was that he had that great instinct, and he didn't listen to critics, you know, and especially in the tech industry, which is full of engineers who think that what they have to do is load on more features. But for him, a great product was one that really cut back on features. That was very, very simple and easy to use. And the one-button mouse is a good example. I mean, Apple and Steve Jobs took criticism for years for that. But that was sort of a big part of the magic, and that's why his products have been so influential.
I want to bring Martin Lindstrom, author of Brainwashed, into the conversation, but first I want to share the statement that we've just received from Apple. And Apple says, quote, "Apple has lost a visionary and creative genius, and the world has lost an amazing human being. Those of us that have been fortunate enough to know and work with Steve have lost a dear friend and an inspiring mentor. Steve leaves behind a company that only he could have, and his spirit will be forever the foundation of Apple." Martin, what's your reaction here to the legacy of Steve Jobs?
Well, first of all, of course, I'm incredibly sad about the news. But I think if you take a look at it from a business point of view, I actually think for a while we're going to see something unusual happening with the brand. And that is that we're going to see people will start to support the brand even more. We most likely will see that sales will go up dramatically right now. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we've seen that in so many other cases where founders or musicians or very popular public figures have passed away, that the sales is going up. So for a short period of time, we will see that people will almost support him indirectly by buying more of the Apple equipment. And then over time, what will happen is the big question mark, because you do represent a religion. And we do know today that when the religious leader is gone, there needs to be something else driving that vision for the company. So that's going to be very interesting what will happen.
And it's interesting, we've talked about that, over the years, that it's an amazing product, but there was a cult in the best of ways. There was a religion around him and his vision. Sanjay Gupta's just pulling up something that is so worth mentioning. I mean, Apple is the second most valuable company in America.
It listed it had more cash reserves in the U.S. Treasury and even surpassed ExxonMobil as the world's most valuable company, and that was this year. And the products you mentioned, it's no surprise that you were seeing them all over like you were in your travels. 275 million iPods, 100 million iPhones, 25 million iPads sold worldwide.
I mean,
it's remarkable.
It is, Martin. I mean, when you think about it, and I know it's hard to do this off the cuff, but I mean, there may be no one who has had more of an influence in such a short period of time in changing how we all live our lives and the tools that we deem essential for daily life.
And you're absolutely right. And what I find fascinating is that some of the work I've done over the years using neuroscience in order to understand Apple's influence on us as consumers have shown that there is incredible strong parallels between religion and Apple. In fact, we were testing the Apple brand in parallel with other very powerful brands, and time after time, the parallel between strong religious believers, for example, believing in the faith of Christianity, had almost the same brain reaction as people which really were hardcore fans of Apple. So what we can do is to look at what is going to happen when Steve Jobs now is gone. And I think one of the things we will see happen is that movement, which really is the reason why Apple is so big, that movement will probably be even stronger because they feel it's their legacy to really continue the spirit of the brand. So I think we will see something really unusual happen, probably something we've never seen in the history of brands before.
And just in the past few minutes, I mean, Sanjay, we already have 457 related articles to this story just to show what's happening. I wanted to ask you something. When I'm just looking here at the timeline of Steve Jobs, 3 years ago, a news service accidentally published an obituary for Steve Jobs in August of 2008.
I remember that, yeah.
I mean, he really fought.
He did, and remember after that is when he had this liver transplant, and he really nobody knew about this. I mean, we certainly keep on top of what's happening with him at any given time. He had this liver transplant. We found out about it after the fact, and that was ended up taking place in Memphis. But then, as you mentioned, he did sort of recover from that, and came back and was leading the company for a while. I thought it was interesting as well, Aaron. Maybe you knew about this, but there's an authorized biography coming out of Steve Jobs. It's actually Walter Isaacson's writing it, who used to work here at CNN.
Right.
But Steve Jobs cooperated fully with this biography, and the reason I think that's relevant is a lot of people said he would never do that unless he was becoming very mindful of his legacy, mindful of the fact that maybe he was quite sick and his days were numbered. That's scheduled to come out in November.